whole pyramid complex itself at Giza links to Mars. For example, every year on the same day, the passageway to the King's Chamber focuses on the planet Mars and creates a red orb on the wall across from the sarcophagus there. So Cairo was the center of a world civilization 11,500 years ago that was either a colony of Mars or that had a colony on Mars. My own particular speculation is that Mars was a colony of an Earth civilization. And I say that because the Great Pyramid at Giza and the Sphinx are much more substantial ancient monuments than what we're finding on Mars. The evidence that I found on Mars is much more scattered and fragmentary. And of course, Earth is has a much more bountiful natural environment to sustain life, including human life. So my suspicion is that life started here and had a colony on Mars. Now we know that, for example, Nefertiti, as depicted in that famous, the iconic bust of hers that the German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt found in Amarna, Egypt in 1912, was the royal consort for Pharaoh Akhenaten, who was the sun god. And in my investigations of Mars, I would find not only that the surface of Mars is littered with dark turquoise rocks and also with drab green and blood red colors that are on Nefertiti's famous, conical hat on that bust, but also I have found artifacts on Mars with an identical headpiece. So I think it's fair to conclude that the sun god, as he was called, Pharaoh Akhenaten, and his queen, the royal consort, Queen Nefertiti, were the monarchs who were in power during the time of the pharaohs when that ancient Egyptian civilization reached its zenith and reached Mars and placed artifacts there. In fact, my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, goes into this at considerable length. But in any case,
Wow,
these men...
that's so cool. Okay, sorry, continue.
So these three men there at Curtis Wright were Martians. They were Martians like us. In fact, if today a Han Chinese individual can marry somebody from, Mexico, and their genes haven't seen each other, haven't been in the same baby in 6,000 years. Presumably, these Martians, who are only separated by 11,500 years, are possibly members of our own species. They could possibly reproduce with us because they were men, and I could tell they were a little different looking. But as we'll later see, we have a good estimate of the gene pool on Mars, and so there was a reason for them being a little homelier and a little bit more specialized than modern humans on Earth with all of our genetic diversity. These were probably Homo sapiens who are literally our long-lost relatives on Mars who could probably reproduce with us if they haven't already developed a unique speciation as a result of being isolated from us for 11,500 years.
They probably already reproduced with us.
What the case was, I would say these were probably Homo sapiens who have an identical or very, very similar DNA structure to ourselves. And in fact, my dad was emphatic. He said, they're human beings like us, except they're from Mars. Okay, so apparently by 1970, the separation of those two cultures, which was traumatic, and in fact, the Mayan elder Barbara Hand Cloud has talked about how that event created catastrophobia in our culture, where we're phobic about Mars, phobic about space, and fearful of a repeat of that kind of solar system cataclysm, because human civilization on Earth wouldn't recover until around 3000 BC. And I was schooled on the fact in Pegasus, in these yellow book sessions that we were having about extraterrestrial issues, that the civilization that we're living in, this successor civilization to the ancient Egyptian one, began in ancient Sumer around 3000 BC with intervention by an advanced extraterrestrial species. Certainly not the creatures on Mars. This was an advanced, intelligent hominid species from outside our solar system that came here and reintroduced things like mathematics and writing. And that's why we've been developing as an international culture since around 3000 BC. That dichotomy also explains all these more ancient relics of the previous civilization that we're still finding when we hack away at, for example, the jungles of of Central America. So there was apparently some kind of priority that was given to making sure that I went over to Curtis Wright that Saturday morning with my dad and met those 3 Martians. In fact, they knew who I was, which is, I guess, because they had been told that, one of the sons of one of our project engineers is going to play a role in normalizing relations between our planet and yours, and we would like you to meet him. He's only 8. I think something like that must have happened, because the Martians were nothing but kind to my father and I, and they didn't question me or anything. He simply sort of said, and thank you for introducing us to your young son Andy, and he kind of like looked down at me and nodded and smiled. So these Martians were nothing but considerate, intelligent people. But that wasn't the only data point from my own Mars writings that was shared with me as a child. Because after that event, and this event I can date, my mom had permitted me to go out and trick-or-treating, and I know this just from family lore and my own memory, when I was 10, in the fall of 1971. I would have turned 10 in September of 71, I did, and during Halloween, even though I had a severe case of bronchitis, she let me go trick-or-treating, and I got even more sick. And I got very sick. In fact, I still have some respiratory sensitivity that crops up every once in a while from that case of bronchitis then. She really shouldn't have let me go out because I was very sick. I got even sicker, a higher fever, more profound bronchitis. And as I was recovering from that case of bronchitis, I remember one Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, whatever, it was definitely a weekend because my dad was home from work, and I could hear some of my relatives meeting with my folks down in the living room. I think it was probably my Uncle Richard and Aunt Edith were visiting from Long Island because there was a lot of laughter going on. And I was a really lucky kid because I had a really great family. Both my immediate family and all my relatives were really wonderful people. And I think that's, in fact, one of the reasons why I was selected for Pegasus as a child is I was really from a strong family, not a weak one, and a really secure upbringing. And so I could hear the laughter downstairs, but since I'd already gotten sick going trick-or-treating, my mom had kind of, quarantined me in the sick room, as it were. And my dad came into the room. And every time to get us out of our sick beds when we were kids, he would always buy us a big Hershey bar just to motivate us to, get back into the swing of things and enjoy it. But so I thought, he's coming into the room here to try to get me out of my sick bed. He's got a Hershey bar. But he had an envelope instead. Again, one of the ones with the red wax seal and the tie string and some kind of routing document or label attached to it. And he opened it up and he said, Andy, I've got something for you to read. And he handed me a paper, and I said, what is it? And so he hands me the paper, and it was my 2008 paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars. In fact, it was a copy of it in which the photos came out really well. So presumably, it had to be a document from at least 40 years or so in the future, 37 years in the future, because it's 1971, and he's handing me a copy of my 2008 paper that I could have printed this morning at a local Kinko's. I mean, it was a quality version of the paper. So we know it was accessed via time travel from some time after I published the paper in 2008. And clearly by this time, by 1971, now about 3 years after the original incident involving Mars, where my dad was laughing about what was in the paper, he had clearly read the paper because he had already opened the envelope, and he was handing me the paper somewhat reverentially. In other words, this meeting was not a time for laughter at all. It was a deadly serious meeting in which he was being very respectful with what he was handing me. And I said, what is it? And he goes, it's a paper. It's a paper you write. Look at when you write it. And I looked down at the copyright declaration at the bottom of the paper, and it said 2008. And he said, how? Yeah, I said 2008. He goes, how old are you going to be then? And I said, 47. So he said, yes, you're going to be 47, and look what you write. And I said, what is it? And he goes, it's the first paper to prove that Mars is an inhabited planet.